In this video, we will be working through the process for creating the indoor bench project. I purchased this bench off of Facebook Marketplace for $40 and thought that it would be a fun project to recreate and modify. Out of curiosity, I did a search and found this similar bench from Tractor Supply for $240, and I will make a point to note that although there is some solid material on this bench, there is also a fair amount of fake wood or engineered wood. Taking a look at our plans, we have two front legs on our project. These two front legs are irregular in shape, and to make these, we will be making a blank that is larger than the size of the leg, so we can then work that larger piece down into our leg shape. And based on our rough dimension cut list, this larger blank needs to be more than 3 5/16 inches thick by 1 3/4 inches width by 24 inches in length. So I'm going to begin by laying out several pieces that are 1 3/4 inches in width by 24 inches in length. When we get our lumber directly from the lumber yard, it measures 0.95 inches. Our objective is to create a board that has a thickness of more than 3 5/16 inches, which is more than 3.3125 inches. If I stack 4 of my boards measuring 0.95 inches, and I add those together, that gives me a thickness of 3.8 inches. This measurement is more than my 3 5/16 inch thickness measurement. However, because I do need to clean the surface of these boards for gluing, I need to make sure that there are no major defects in the lumber and that my lumber looks pretty good to begin with. And with all this being said, 4 pieces measuring 1 3/4 inch wide by 24 inches long will yield me enough lumber for 1 leg. So I need to lay out an additional 4 pieces. On the miter saw, we will begin our first cut by squaring up the end of each of our boards. We are then going to measure, mark, and cut enough pieces that will yield us enough lumber for our 8 pieces that we will glue together for the front legs. I need to use the joiner to clean up the milled edge, which is the better of the 2 edges, 1 or 2 times to make this edge true. We can then set the table saw to 1 3/4 inches, and with our good, clean, jointed edge up against the fence, we can cut our 1 3/4 inch wide pieces. Now, although we are creating a milled edge by having this piece touch the table saw blade, at this point it does not matter because we will be gluing these pieces together and cleaning them up after that process. Our work pieces measure about 0.95 inches, and I will be marking both sides of my work pieces so I can verify each side is cleaned up. And with our machine set to 0.95 inches, we can run the first face through the machine. Our objective then is to only clean up the pencil marks This will tell us that we have a good gluing surface. We are at the point that we need to glue our oversized pieces together. I'm going to begin by spacing my clamps about 12 inches apart. I'm going to lay this out so I can glue each of the leg pieces together, but I don't want to glue the two legs together. We will be gluing these pieces together and letting them sit for 24 hours. After that, we will want to remove the clamps and joiner two adjacent faces so that we have a perfect 90-degree angle with two of these faces. During my joinering operation, I had labeled my adjacent faces with the word good so that I could remember on the planer which face needs to be face down as the planer knives are on top. And then we can clean up the ends and bring this down to our finished length. We should then be able to trace our template onto our workpiece and bring that over to the bandsaw. We want to make sure to bandsaw an 1/8 inch away from the line. Do not go over the line or it will cause problems in the next phases. With a couple relief cuts, we can bandsaw that out. And we can then perform our cutting operation. And the rear leg process is identical to the front leg process. And with those all cleaned up, all 4 of our legs are complete. Taking a look at our project plans, we have 2 seat side rails. These components connect the front legs to the back legs. If we take a look at the drawing for our seat side rail for both the left and the right, we do have mitered tenons. This tells us that this piece is mortise and tenoned into the legs. We can see that the finished thickness of this piece is 1 1/8 inches. The lumber that we purchase from the lumberyard measures 0.95 or just under an inch. So we know that we will need to be gluing 2 pieces together to allow us to get this thicker size. And I always want to begin by squaring up that end. I can then measure and mark my board at 18 inches, making sure that I don't follow the chalk marks, and continue this process, cutting all 4 of my pieces. We need to true up the milled edge using the joiner. Now, although I am only sanding one surface, the other side with the pencil mark will tell me that that side needs to face out when I glue. And I am wanting to glue my seat rail pieces together, but not the 2 rails together. With everything set up, we want to spread the glue across the entire surface of each workpiece. We then want to flip up each workpiece and clamp it together very gently, adding additional clamps, clamping it gently again, and then slowly snugging all of the clamps, making sure that the pieces haven't shifted on us. After 24 hours, I can remove all of the clamps from my seat side rails, and I need to make sure to square up the ends first by removing as little as possible. I can then set up a stop block at 17 inches and complete my cuts, making sure my previously cut edge is against the stop block. So we will begin by laying out the 1/8 inch portion on the end. Then we can lay out our 1/2 inch. This portion gets cut away. And these will then be 1 inch in. We'll begin by cutting our 1/8 inch deep sides. And without moving the fence, I'm going to raise the blade to 1/2 inch and perform my next cut. And before I get too far, I do want to test this with my leg to make sure that it does fit and I don't need to do any minor adjustments. And this fits real nice. And with the miter saw set to 45 degrees, I can complete my cut. And those mitered tenons look really nice. We can dry fit this together to identify any possible issues. Taking a look at our plans, we have a seat front rail. We have a seat rear rail. We also have a backrest lower rail as well as a backrest upper rail. All of these pieces have identical lengths, so we will be creating all of these at the same time. We'll begin by squaring up the end of the board, measuring and marking it at 47.5 inches, and then performing our cut. And we'll do this for both pieces. We need to clean up the milled edge on the joiner first. And with my good, clean, jointed edge up against the fence, I can complete my cut. Now the edge that touched the table saw blade now has mill marks on it. If we look real close, we can see burn marks and we can see rotational scratches. These mill marks need to be removed on the joiner, which removes 1/16 of an inch. I'm then going to set up a stop block at 47 inches, which is our finished length measurement, and making sure to line up my cut end with my stop block, so I am removing my uncut end. I can complete those cuts. I'm going to begin planing at 0.95 inches, and I'm going to bring these down to about 0.80, so just a little bit thicker than 3/4 of an inch. We are creating identical tenons for all 4 of these pieces, with the exception of the miter, which we're going to do at a later stage. After having laid out all of our tenons and setting up the dado saw to our layout marks, I'm going to cut my first tenon. And with one of our tenons cut, we're going to verify that everything still lines up, all of our measuring was good, and that we don't need to make any minor adjustments. This one fits real nice. And with our miter saw set to 45 degrees, we can complete both of our cuts. I have previously assembled both of my sides. Now having my front and rear rails completed, as well as the backrest rails, I can dry assemble this together. Now it may help to gently clamp one side to the workbench. And with those pieces together, everything should fit nice and snug. Nothing should have been forced to fit. The bench should stand on its own, and there should be no large gaps between the joining surfaces. Taking a look at our project plans, we have 8 seat slats. Those run between the backrest upper rail and the backrest lower rail. We have already created the backrest upper rail and the backrest lower rail. So our focus is on making the seat slats and getting those to fit between my backrest upper rail and my backrest lower rail. According to the plans, the total length of my backrest slat is 12.5 inches. However, the visible area is only 11.5 inches because I do have tenons on the ends of these seat slats. I have a variety of my offcut pieces, and my goal is to get 8 12.5 by 2.25 inch pieces. And after squaring up one end on each of these boards, I can measure and mark my boards at 13 inches, which is my oversized measurement, and cut it to that oversized measurement. Cleaning up that better milled edge on the joiner, and with that good, clean, jointed edge up against the fence, I can cut all of my pieces. Each of these pieces I then need to run through the joiner to clean up that milled edge. And then each of these pieces will be re-squared and then stop blocked to a finished length of 12.5 inches. I'm going to be planing these down to a 1/2 inch heavy. We will temporarily disassemble part of our bench. We then want to clamp both pieces together in place, making sure that the ends are lined up perfectly and the edges are perfectly flush. And then we can put our first mark at 23.5 inches. We then want to measure over 1 9/16 in either direction. And we can use a square to extend those marks. Taking a look at our plans, each of the mortise hole locations measure 2 1/8 inches. Each of the gaps between them are 3 1/8 inches. And I'm going to put some light X's on these 2 1/8 inch portions to give me a visual clue of what needs to be cut out, so I don't accidentally cut out what I shouldn't be cutting. And with our machine set up, we can cut each of those mortise hole locations. And because I cut those mortise hole locations just a little bit deeper than I needed to, I shouldn't have to clean up the bottom of any of the holes. Moving back to our backrest slats, we need to lay out the tenons. Now these go in a 1/2 inch and we have a 1/16 inch shoulder around the outside. Now I should be able to lay out one of these, set my saw to that measurement, and then be able to cut all of them and have them identically the same. With my tenons laid out, I can set my saw to my marks and begin by only cutting one end first. And then I'm going to test it. We need to make sure that all of this is going to fit together in this stage so that when we move on to the glue stage, there's no issues. We also want to assemble the backrest onto our project, and then we can see if that fits. Everything is lining up really nice. All of the joints look very tight. There are no large gaps. We want to glue up only the seat back, which means just the connection points where the slats meet the rails. So we need to do just a little bit of disassembly. And we're going to be applying a small amount of glue to the mortise hole locations. And using a brush, we can spread that around. And then put it on the project. And to help keep everything tight and in place, I'm going to add just a couple clamps, and we're going to let that sit just like that for 24 hours. With our slats all glued into place and the rest of our project just dry assembled, we're going to start focusing on the armrests. Taking a look at our plans, we have two armrests. These pieces are mirror images of each other as well. The curved portion needs to face outward. The flat edge needs to face inward to give clearance for the seat. Taking a look at the armrest drawing, we have a width of 3 inches and a length of 19 1/4 inches. So I need a piece of lumber that I can get two 20 1/4 inch long pieces. And because I'm using an offcut piece from a previous board, my first end is already square, so I can measure, mark, and cut each of these pieces. We can then set up a stop block at 19 1/4 and cut the other end of our boards off. And we want to plane both sides of these boards down to about 0.8 inches, which is just heavy of 3/4. I do have a full-scale template that will allow me to draw this out a little bit quicker and a little bit easier. I can then set that template on my workpiece and trace the contour. And I will want to do this for both of my pieces. And we now need to bandsaw them to an oversized shape. On the spindle sander with our large diameter installed, we can slowly bring that down just to the line. And I'm then going to set my saw to 84.82 degrees, which is also 5.18 degrees. And I can complete my cut, removing as little material as possible. I can then verify that fit on my project. Although we have dry assembled a portion of our bench and the backrest slats are glued in, we are going to disassemble this and only dry assemble the sides. Now my critical measurement with this armrest is that the distance from the seat side rail to the armrest is identical. And then I'll make a mark on both sides. On the front portion of the armrest, I am also going to trace the front leg. I can then take all of this apart and clamp my leg in the vise. And we will be making an X from corner to corner, which will help us place the dowel location. And I can do the same on my armrest. On my leg, I'm going to be drilling down 1 inch depth, and I will want to do this for both sides. At this point, we're going to dry fit our side assemblies together again, this time making sure that the dowel location does line up good and that there are no other issues. What we're trying to do is hold everything in place perfectly so it won't move. And our goal is to add a series of clamps so that everything lines up perfectly and nothing's going to move on us. And what I'm trying to do is force the opposite side down against the workbench so it is perfectly flush. And to pinpoint the center location, we can use our X method. We can then use a 3/8 inch Forstner bit to drill about 3/8 inch deep. We can then follow that with a 1/8 inch pilot hole bit, and then we can slowly install the screw just until it's snug, listening for any cracking or popping of the lumber. And with all the pencil marks sanded off, we are ready to glue. Now once we start applying glue, we have to have everything perfect within 10 minutes. And we want enough clamps and support that everything will be held tight until the glue dries so that we don't have any gaps. We'll do the other side and let these sit for 24 hours. Taking a look at our plans, we can see the seat, which opens and closes on our project. I have selected a variety of boards to use in the creation of my seat. Each of the boards measure more than 46 inches in length because that is my oversized measurement. If I combine all of the boards and measure the width, it equals more than 18¼ inches. My pieces measure about 24 inches, but you have to consider we will be cleaning up the edges, joinery, table saw, so on and so forth, so this number will go down. So we have to estimate that all of these pieces together, once cleaned up, will be more than 18¼ inches. We want to begin by first squaring up the end of each of these boards. And with our good, clean, jointed edge up against the fence, we want to adjust the fence with each cut so that we are removing the least amount of material, which will leave us with the maximum amount of material width-wise. And because I created a milled edge on the table saw, I can go back through the joiner and clean up that milled edge. And I'm going to work through and I'm shifting my pieces around until I have a good looking grain pattern across all of the pieces. Next, I'm going to number each of the joints. Each edge will then get glue, and I need to spread this around. to coat the entire edge surface. I can then flip down all of those pieces and pull these pieces together. I want to very gently apply a little bit of pressure with the clamps, making sure my pieces don't shift around. I can then add additional clamps to the other side, giving that just a little bit of pressure as well. And then I can go through and snug each of the clamps. We can trim up our first end on the panel saw, taking off as little as possible just to square up that end. We can then slide down our workpiece, and I can then complete that second cut. So our objective at this stage is to plane off as little material as possible, and then bringing the sander down 1/100th inch at a time until both surfaces are perfect. Our seat is sitting flush with our rear rail, and our objective is to install a piano hinge between that rear rail and the seat. We need to install a guide for the router bearing to follow. And I'm going to remove that back piece. And what I'm going to be doing is taking my back rail piece, a scrap piece that I've cut perfectly straight, and my hinge, and I'm going to stack these together, moving that scrap piece up and down until that hinge is perfectly flush with the top surface of my back rail. We can then move to the router and very carefully make sure we are adhering to the lines that we drew. On our hinge, we have a paint clearance, which almost looks like a little cut mark into the hinge. This paint clearance will be our reference line. And that paint clearance line needs to be lined up with the back edge surface of our workpiece. And with everything lined up, we can mark our first hole location. Using a scratch awl or the tip of a screw, I'm going to put a small divot right in the center of that hole location and drill my pilot hole 3/32 of an inch in diameter. I'm going to drill that just a little bit deeper than the length of the screw. Applying just a little bit of bar soap to the threads of the screw will help it install a lot easier. We do want to install this by hand without a drill. Now I have the first screw installed. I am only going to install 2 additional screws at this stage. When I lay this out, that rail needs to be extended beyond the seat by about 1/8 of an inch on both sides. Additionally, my paint clearance line on the hinge needs to be lined up with the back edge of that seat. Only having 3 screws installed at this stage will help us with those adjustments later. And we can then install those 3 screws by hand with just a little bit of bar soap on the threads. With 3 screws in the rail and 3 screws in the seat, I can remove any additional clamps I have and reassemble this together to dry fit these components on my project. Everything is looking good on my project so far. We are ready to install the rest of the screws, so we need to disassemble this again and bring this over to the workbench. And for the rail side, I'm going to set this up in 2 vices and work through that same procedure. As of right now, we have our bench sides assembled and glued. We have our seat back assembled and glued. And we have our seat with the rear rail assembled with the hinge. And we are at the point where we are able to put everything together. And to set this up, I'm going to get all of my pieces ready to go. Now, when we start this gluing process, we have to be finished and everything perfect within 10 minutes. And I will begin by applying glue to the mortise hole locations. I do have my project hanging off of the table because that armrest extends beyond the edge of the project. With that glue installed, I can install my front rail, followed by my back rail, that then followed by my back rest. This does work best if you have multiple people helping you. In an attempt to reduce the amount of glue that's going to drip on the project, I will apply the glue to my other side with it laying flat on the workbench. And with that glue applied, I'm going to tip the bench up and slowly work the side assembly onto each of those tenons, making sure I get them lined up precisely. So I'm going to add 4 clamps, each running along the length of each of the rails for the seat rails and the backrest rails. I'm then going to come back and add 1 clamp diagonally across the seat. And the purpose of that clamp is to make sure I am gluing things up square and that small area of reveal between the seat and the side rail is equal distant the entire length. Those clamps will then stay on for 24 hours. Underneath our seat, we have an area for storage, and inside here we have seat support cleats to add additional strength to the seat when someone is sitting on it. We have our storage bottom, and underneath the bottom we have storage cleats. Those are hidden from view. Those are the pieces that the bottom is sitting on. I found some off-cut pieces from previous boards. I should be able to get my 2 shorter left and right storage cleat pieces from my smaller stock and my 2 longer 45-inch pieces from my longer piece of stock. Now I do already have 1 pretty good edge. I am not worried about the mill marks at this point. I just need a good edge to put up against the fence. Those 4 pieces will then be run through the planer, alternating sides until I can bring them down to 3/4 of an inch by 3/4 of an inch. And I can then cut each of those to length. And with our longer cleat piece, we will apply a little bit of glue and spread that around. Then we'll install it at the lowest point on our rear seat rail with a few clamps, and then we can clean up any glue that squeezed out. And then we'll tack that in place with 1 1/4 inch brad nails. Those clamps can then be removed. We can wipe the glue again and move on to the next piece. Now we are doing both of the long pieces first and then adding the short sides. With the storage cleats created and installed, we are ready to start thinking about the storage bottom. According to our parts list, the storage bottom is a 1/4 inch oak veneer plywood. This measuring 15 3/4 by 45 inches. The 15 3/4 by 45, I'm going to wait on those measurements and double check on my project because I could be off a little bit. And I do want to verify those measurements. 45 and 1/32 by 45 and 1/32. Front to back, I am 15 and 7/8 by 15 and 7/8. On the panel saw, I'm going to load my good side of the sheet facing the wall. This will give me a little cleaner cut. And we can measure, mark, and cut that piece to our length measurement. And we can then rip that to 15 and 7/8 on the table saw. And we can then test fit that in our project to see if our measuring was accurate. And this bottom piece fits very nice. This will be installed with a little bit of glue on the top edge of the cleat. The bottom is going to sit in there, and I'm going to add some weight to kind of hold this down, and then I'll add those couple clamps in the front. And with that bottom installed, we're going to let that dry for 24 hours. Our project has 2 seat support cleats, 1 on each side. This will add structural integrity to the seat when someone sits on it by helping prevent the seat from bending down when there is a lot of weight put on it. Now when the seat closes, I am sitting on the inside of my side rails. My seat thickness is about 0.8 inches. Calculating this would take some time, or we could just measure the back rail distance from where the seat meets the top edge to the storage bottom. And we can verify that back measurement with the corresponding front measurement. And both of these measurements are just a hair under 2 7/8. Lengthwise, I am at about 15 7/8, and I'm still going to keep my 3/4 inch thick measurement. We can then progress through the process for squaring a board with the miter saw, the joiner, the table saw, back to the joiner, and then the planer. And these should fit snug but not tight. They will be pushed all the way up against the side rail, but if any part of it is not correct, we can make those adjustments at this point. And we can do that same test on the other side. To install these, we will first apply a little bit of glue, position it into place, and we're going to add a few clamps. And after doing the other side, we can let this sit for 24 hours. With everything installed and glued, and we've waited 24 hours for everything to dry, we can remove all the clamps. With the exception of sanding, the project build process is done. And with everything sanded, the last thing to do is install 2 3/8 inch oak buttons at the back of our project. This project is now complete and we are ready for stain and finish.